Welcome to the next episode of Small Business Legal Tips. Today we're going to talk about one of the biggest questions Massachusetts entrepreneurs face when starting a new business. Should I start my business as a limited liability company, also known as an LLC, or start it as a sole proprietorship? There is no right answer to this question, but the decision is huge and can have a huge impact on your taxes, the potential for personal liability, how easy it is to obtain outside investors, and various other things. I'm attorney Mark Bross of Bross Law LLC. I'm a practicing business attorney in Massachusetts, and I've helped countless entrepreneurs choose between starting their business as a sole proprietorship or an LLC. In this video, I'll explain the differences between a sole proprietorship and an LLC, the pros and cons of each business structure, and why you might want to choose one or the other to start your business. By the end of this video, you'll be able to choose between them and pick the right business structure for your new business needs. And please, if you'd like to get more helpful legal tips, please hit the like and subscribe button below. It really helps the channel and lets me know that you'd like to receive more tips like this. So let's get to it. Sole proprietorship. Let's start with a sole proprietorship. A sole proprietorship is by far the most basic form of business structure you can have. You don't need to do anything to set it up, but you just need to start conducting business. So for example, if you want to start a consulting business under your name, all you need to do to start a sole proprietorship is to start offering your consulting services and get paid. It's that simple. And once you start conducting business under your own name, you're considered a sole proprietorship. Now, although a sole proprietorship is easy to start up and you don't need to file anything, many entrepreneurs don't want to operate a business under their own individual name, but they want to have a business name for branding purposes. So for example, you might want to operate your business consulting firm under the name Apex Business Consulting to signify that your business consulting services will help companies reach the top of their industry. Now, if you want to operate your sole proprietorship under a name that's different from your personal name, you would need to file a business certificate, also known as a DBA certificate, and pay a fee. In Massachusetts, you file a business certificate with the town where the business is located and have to pay a fee of at least $30, although the cost can vary depending on the location. Once filed and accepted, it's good for 4 years and has to be renewed every 4 years, and you have to pay the same fee every 4 years. So what are the advantages of a sole proprietorship? Generally speaking, there are 4 main advantages to operating a business as a sole proprietorship: cost, control, maintenance, and taxes. With respect to costs, there are minimal to no costs to establishing a sole proprietorship, which makes it a popular choice for many entrepreneurs with little to no funding. Even if you want to operate under an assumed name like Apex Business Consulting, a business certificate is fairly cheap in Massachusetts. The highest cost for a business certificate that I'm aware of is the City of Boston, which is $65 and needs to be renewed every 4 years, like I mentioned earlier. I'll put a link below to a website operated by the state of Massachusetts that discusses business certificates in Massachusetts. These costs obviously do not include the cost of any other licenses and permits that are needed to operate your business, but that will be the same for any business structure that you decide to start up. The second advantage of a sole proprietorship is control. In a sole proprietorship, the owner maintains 100% of the ownership and control of the business. A sole proprietorship, by definition, can only have one owner, and that owner will receive all of the profits and losses of the business and be solely responsible for every aspect of the business. For a lot of entrepreneurs, this feature is very attractive. The third advantage is that sole proprietorships have very little ongoing maintenance requirements. Aside from the business certificate, which has to be renewed every 4 years, the only maintenance requirement for a sole proprietorship is to keep on operating the business. So long as you continue operating, your sole proprietorship exists and there's nothing else that needs to be done. The fourth advantage to a sole proprietorship is taxes. Filing taxes as a sole proprietorship is very easy. You just need to file your personal tax return, which is IRS Form 1040, and add a Schedule C for your business. I'll put a link below to the IRS website that discusses it. So what are the disadvantages of a sole proprietorship? Generally speaking, there are 5 main disadvantages to a sole proprietorship: exposure, raising money, self-employment taxes, and business lifespan. With respect to liability exposure, this is the single biggest disadvantage of sole proprietorships. In a sole proprietorship, there is no legal distinction between the owner and the business. So this means that if anyone sues the business for any reason whatsoever, the business owner's cash, car, or home are potentially on the line, even if they're not used in the business. This potentially means unlimited liability for the entrepreneur, and this can be really scary for a lot of entrepreneurs. The second disadvantage is that sole proprietorships often have difficulty in raising capital because they can't take on outside investors by selling membership interest in their LLC or stock in their company. Sole proprietors can borrow money like other business structures, but banks are often hesitant to give loans to sole proprietors, and they often have to use their personal assets like their homes as collateral. As a result, for many sole proprietors, the only available source of capital are personal funds, which can make it very difficult to scale and grow. The third disadvantage for sole proprietorships is that they have to pay self-employment tax on all profits of the business up to a certain threshold. Self-employment tax is a tax that consists of federal Social Security and Medicare tax for self-employed individuals, and the self-employment tax as of today is 15.3%. I'll put a link below to the IRS website that discusses self-employment tax. This can get pricey and is one of the downsides to operating a business as a sole proprietorship. The fourth disadvantage of a sole proprietorship is that the business ceases to exist upon the retirement or death of the owner. This is very different from other types of business structures and can be a tough pill to swallow for business owners who have put their heart and soul into their work and their business. So let's move on to limited liability companies. A limited liability company, commonly called an LLC, is one of the most popular business structures in the United States today. LLCs are formed under the laws of a particular state, and you need to follow the rules of that state when setting up the LLC. In Massachusetts, the applicable statute is called MGL 156C, which is also known as the Limited Liability Company Act. Now, since we're comparing an LLC to a sole proprietorship, I will only be talking about a single-member LLC, which means that there's only one owner of the LLC. If there were two or more owners of the LLC, it would be called a multi-member LLC, which has some different features that are not really relevant here. So what are the advantages of a single-member LLC? Generally speaking, there are four main advantages to a single-member LLC when compared to a sole proprietorship. The first advantage of a single-member LLC is that the LLC is a legal entity that is completely separate from its owner in the eyes of the law. This means that the LLC can sign its own contracts, have its own bank account, be responsible for its own debts, and is held accountable for its own actions. This is completely different from a sole proprietorship where there is no separate entity and the owner is responsible for everything. Many businesses feel like the status as a separate entity gives their business a little more credibility when dealing with other larger companies, and they really like the separate entity status. Related to this, the second advantage of a single-member LLC is that the LLC provides some personal asset protection for its sole owner. This means that, generally speaking, if the LLC owes money to a creditor, the creditor cannot pursue the personal assets of the owner to cover these debts. Instead, the only personal assets of the owner that are at risk is the amount of capital that the owner has invested in the business. Beyond that, the owner's personal assets should be safe so long as the rules of the entity are followed and you don't commingle assets. However, as I discussed in my earlier legal myths video, this protection is not absolute, and there are certain circumstances where the owner's personal assets might still be at risk even though you're operating as an LLC. But a sole proprietorship provides no asset protection, so the single-member LLC is much better on this front. The third advantage of a single-member LLC as compared to a sole proprietorship is that LLCs are very flexible with respect to how the entity is taxed. The default taxation for a single-member LLC is as a sole proprietorship, which means that the single-member LLC is taxed in the exact same way as the sole proprietorship is taxed. I'll put a link below to the IRS website page that discusses this. So this would mean that you would need to file your personal income tax return, which is IRS Form 1040, and add a Schedule C for the business, just like the sole proprietor does. However, one of the great things about being a single-member LLC is that LLCs can also choose to be taxed as a C corporation or as an S corporation if you want. This can dramatically decrease your tax burden or increase it should you to speak with an accountant before electing to be taxed as a C corporation or an S corporation. To change your tax election, you need to file a form with the IRS, and I'll put a link below to the website that discusses how to do that. The fourth main advantage to being a single-member LLC is that they can possibly last after the owner dies or decides to retire. There are a couple things to note here, however. First, some states don't allow this for single-member LLCs. So if this feature is important to you, make sure that you check the LLC statute in the state where you're setting up your LLC to make sure they allow for single-member LLCs to exist after the owner dies. Second, in order to continue existing after the sole owner's death, Most states require you to have a certain provision in your operating agreement that specifies what happens to the LLC in the event of the sole owner's death. So if this is important to you, you will need to have an operating agreement that specifies that the LLC will survive your death and who the membership interest will transfer to you when you die. So what are the disadvantages of a single-member LLC? Generally speaking, there are 4 main disadvantages of operating a single-member LLC instead of a sole proprietorship. The first main disadvantage of operating as a single-member LLC is that it's more expensive to start up an LLC than a sole proprietorship. In order to start the LLC, you'll need to file some type of document with the Secretary of State in the state where you're forming the LLC and pay the filing fees. In Massachusetts, the document is called the Certificate of Organization, but it could be called a Certificate of Formation or something else similar to that in the state where you're setting up the LLC. The filing fees can be expensive depending on the state where you're located and you're setting up the LLC. In Massachusetts, for example, it's at least $520, but more likely it's going to be $520 because if you want to file online or by fax, it's going to be $520. Additionally, if you hire an attorney to help you set up the LLC, you have to pay the legal costs associated with hiring an attorney. The second disadvantage to operating as a single-member LLC instead of a sole proprietorship is that there are restrictions on the name you can choose for your LLC. As I discussed in my Massachusetts LLC video, in Massachusetts, every LLC must include limited company or limited liability company or their abbreviations as part of the name. I'll put a link to that video below so you can learn more information about that. Additionally, the name can't be the same or confusingly similar to any other corporation, limited partnership, or LLC that's already registered with the Secretary's office without that entity's written consent. Other states have similar requirements. So if you want to be a single-member LLC, you've got to choose a name that meets the requirements in the state where you're setting up the LLC. Sole proprietorships don't really have these restrictions except for the need to file a business certificate if you want to operate under a name that's different than your personal name. But LLCs also have these business certificate requirements. If you want to operate the business under a name that's different than the LLC's name, you'll also have to file for a business DBA certificate just like a sole proprietorship does. The third disadvantage of operating a single-member LLC is a loss of privacy, at least in Massachusetts. When filing your certificate of organization in Massachusetts, you'll need to provide your name and address if you want to be identified as the resident agent, a manager, or a person who can sign document with the Secretary's office or the Registry of Deeds. You'll also need to provide the address in Massachusetts where the records of the LLC will be maintained. All of this information is publicly available and searchable on the Massachusetts Division of Corporations website, and it's not uncommon to start receiving junk mail right after the LLC is formed. If you're operating your business out of your home, this loss of privacy can be very concerning, since many people don't want their personal addresses to be public information for their business partners or their customers. Sole proprietorships don't really have this problem, at least in Massachusetts, because there is no single publicly searchable database where this information can easily be found. Many states have similar publicity requirements as Massachusetts when forming an LLC, so even if you're not located here, forming a single-member LLC might result in a loss of privacy. The fourth disadvantage of operating a single-member LLC instead of a sole proprietorship is that LLCs have ongoing compliance costs and responsibilities. The exact requirements and their costs will vary from state to state. But in Massachusetts, every LLC must file an annual report and pay the filing fees, which are at least $500 every year. And if you don't file your annual report, your LLC can be administratively dissolved, which means that it will no longer provide any liability protection for your personal assets. If you're not located in Massachusetts, check with your Secretary of State to see what the ongoing compliance requirements are. Don't ignore them, since this can lead to the dissolution of your LLC and your personal assets might no longer be protected if the LLC gets sued. So which one is right for you? A sole proprietorship or a single-member LLC? There is no one-size-fits-all answer. The best choice for you and your business depends on your business goals, your risk tolerance, and your budget. But here are some guidelines to consider. A sole proprietorship might be right for you if any of the following situations apply. First, no money. One reason to start as a sole proprietorship is if you have very little or no money to start the business. The cost of forming and maintaining an LLC can be prohibitive, especially in Massachusetts. So if you want to put all your money into just operating the business and getting it up and running, you might want to think about starting as a sole proprietorship instead of being an LLC. If you need a business certificate, they're fairly cheap and easy to obtain, and the cost will be no more than $30 to $60. Second, testing an idea. Another reason that you might want to start as a sole proprietorship is if you are just testing a business idea and you're not sure if it's profitable or worth your time and effort. If that's the case, you might want to just start as a sole proprietorship to see if the idea works and it generates enough revenue in order to actually be a business. And if the idea works and can be profitable, you can then always become an LLC at a later date. Third, home-based business with no employees. Another reason you might want to consider starting as a sole proprietorship is if you are operating a home-based business with no employees. If your business just involves you working out of a home office, it's not clear how much a single-member LLC will help shield your personal assets since you're performing the work at home and your home is often the asset that most people are trying to protect. However, once you start hiring employees or have other assets that you want to protect, or you move your office out of your home, it may no longer make sense to be a sole proprietorship and you should consider becoming an LLC at that later date. On the flip side, a single-member LLC might be the right choice to start your business if any of the following applies. First, asset protection. One reason to choose an LLC to start your business is if you want to protect your personal assets. As we discussed earlier, LLCs can help shield your personal assets so long as you follow the rules of the entity and make sure to fulfill all compliance requirements. Sole proprietorships provide absolutely no protection. Second, employees. Another reason to choose a single-member LLC to start your business is if you have employees or plan on hiring employees at some point in the near future. In this case, an LLC is critical so that you're protected from their actions and their negligence. Sole proprietorships can hire employees, but employees significantly increase the risks of potential liability for the owners, so it's better to have an LLC if you plan on hiring any employees. Third, tax flexibility. Another reason to choose a single-member LLC to start your business is if you think that you're going to pay yourself wages at some point in the near future. In this case, an LLC would be beneficial because you can start out with the default taxation as a sole proprietorship and then elect to be taxed as an S corporation or a C corporation at some point in the future and save on self-employment tax. Sole proprietorships don't have this tax flexibility. I hope you found this information helpful. Please hit the like and subscribe button below so you don't miss any future episodes of Small Business Legal Tips. And if you'd like me to cover another topic, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.